He had created a structure. First of all, we were used to our elected administrative bodies, our national assemblies. That was all right. We'd had NSAs and we'd had elected local assemblies from the days of the master. We were used to it. We'd had hands, relatively speaking, more recently. And we were getting used to the fact that we had the institution of the hands of the cause of God. But nobody could ever see that the hands of the cause of God would be called upon, heartbroken as they were, and certainly I was the most heartbroken, to suddenly seize the cause. And we did. This is a miracle of the solidity of the Baha'i faith, that at this awful shock that shook us to our foundation, we were strong enough to hold the Baha'i faith together. And then later, through our efforts and through our encouragement and our messages to the Baha'is, that we were able to supervise the election of the Universal House of Justice, which incidentally took place in this house of Abdul-Baha. It was a very wonderful occasion.
The unanimous proclamation from this first conclave addressed to the Baha'is of the East and West stated, "The first effect of the realization that no successor to Shoghi Effendi could have been appointed by him was to plunge the hands of the cause into the very abyss of despair." This historic proclamation goes on to describe the true legacy that Shoghi Effendi had left, including a worldwide community represented in 254 countries and dependencies, with a world-encircling 10-year plan to be completed in 1963, the 100th anniversary of Baha'u'llah's proclamation in Baghdad. He had, moreover, set out detailed plans for the bringing into being of the institutions at the World Center, and bestowed the mantle of Hand of the Cause upon 27 believers, who, in his final communication in October 1957, he had designated as chief stewards of the embryonic world commonwealth of Baha'u'llah. Above all, the beloved guardian had left his numerous writings as an everlasting legacy. This proclamation was then signed by all the hands present.
I suppose to all of us it brings back unbelievable memories of suffering and of anxiety and of responsibility. The sudden death of the guardian that broke our hearts, and then this terrible, terrible load of responsibility coming on us. But it showed why he had appointed these hands, because it was the hands of the cause that, worthy or unworthy, and we never felt that we were worthy, just seized the cause and held it until we could have the election in this home of Abdul-Baha, of the Universal House of Justice. And I'm very glad there's three of us here. We're a dying species, but we're still here. We all three remember that there wasn't this much, for 1 second, consciousness amongst the hands that we should go on holding the power. We had the whole Baha'i world, all the money of the Baha'i world, all the responsibility of the Baha'i world. The Baha'i stood firm, and we took this and handed it over intact, money and power and respect and kudus and everything, where it should be in the hands of the International Baha'i Assembly, the Supreme House of Justice. And I think that this is what we will be remembered for.
One of the binding obligations in preparation for the transition of authority to the Universal House of Justice was to appoint 9 members from amongst the contingent of hands to serve and live in the Holy Land and act as legal custodians. In order not to raise the profile of any individual hand, however, it was agreed that there would be no permanent officers. This remarkable act protected the community and ensured that no individuals would be misconstrued as leader, thus detracting from the purity of their motives, or, God forbid, be seen as a possible successor to the guardian of the faith. Even so, one amongst the body of hands, Mason Remy, later claimed to be just that. The body of the hands spent considerable time counseling and admonishing him that such a claim was totally inconsistent with the will and testament of Abdu'l-Baha. Finally, in 1960, they were forced to expel him from the faith. Here, the hands assembled at the second annual conclave in 1958 are seen as they leave one of the many sessions. The hands had 4 more conclaves, here in the privacy of the mansion of Baji.
We all met in Baji because we could go up in the hall and it was absolutely private. Nobody could overhear anything we said. We could have a free, open discussion and express our feelings about the future of the Baha'i faith, the expenditure of the money of the Baha'i faith, what our responsibilities were and so on. Then, of course, we had our meals together. Some of them came back to sleep in Haifa, and some of us remained in Baji. And Bill Sears had a wonderful sense of humor. He'd been a very famous radio broadcaster in America, and he'd been on a very famous program. And he was very witty. And Enoch Olinga had a marvelous sense of humor, and he had a giggle. And I used to get so mad with Bill. He would get Enoch laughing, remember, his jokes. And Enoch had this lovely, lovely big African laugh.
In anticipation of the midway point of the 10-year plan, the Guardian had left a vast, precious gift to the Baha'is of the world. Plans for 5 great gatherings to be held throughout the world in 1958. The hands were also to fulfill the Guardian's wish that 3 new houses of worship be erected, one in the heart of Africa at Kampala, the second in Sydney, Australia, and the third in the heart of the European continent near Frankfurt, Germany. Before his passing, he had personally approved their design, but the task of their completion fell upon the hands. Hands of the cause, Amatul-Baha, Ruhiya Khanum and Enoch Olinga, are seen at the groundbreaking ceremony in Kampala in 1958. And a few years later, in 1961, Amatul-Baha arrived for the dedication of the House of Worship of Africa, and then, accompanied by Mr. Ali Nakhjavani, went to the hall. Other hands present included Mr. Sears, Mr. Samandari, Mr. Banoni, Mr. Olinga, Mr. Robarts, and Dr. Muhajir. The House of Worship in Sydney, Australia, under construction, and the completed House of Worship. The House of Worship in Frankfurt was completed in 1960. The first International Baha'i Council was elected at Rizwan 1961, one of the evolutionary stages in the formation of the Universal House of Justice. Those elected were, from left to right, Sylvia Iowas, Charles Walcott, Jesse and Ethel Revell, Ian Semple, Bora Cavillin, Dr. Lutfullah Hakim, Ali Nakhjavani, and Mildred Motahedeh. In preparation for the election of the Universal House of Justice, the hands wrote to all national assemblies, providing them with the necessary instructions for completing their ballots. And as a final act of complete self-abnegation, while not wishing to limit the freedom of the electors, they requested that the hands be left free to discharge their duties and responsibilities. On April the 21st, 1963, delegates from national assemblies met in the Master's house at number 7 Persian Street. They came from all corners of the globe and were gathered here at the invitation of the Hands of the Cause. This befitting venue saw the election of the supreme body of the Baha'i faith, guided by the Blessed Beauty Baha'u'llah. The Hands oversaw the proceedings and prepared the balloting for the 9 members of the first Universal House of Justice.
When we were thinking about the election of the Universal House of Justice, and Mr. Semple, who is now a member of the House of Justice, was having dinner with me here, and we were talking about how to arrange the election. And I was very, very anxious that we should have it in the home of Abdu'l-Baha. I said, this is really where the Universal House of Justice should be elected, is here, this home of Abdu'l-Baha. So he said, you know, I think we can do it. And I got out my father's 30-foot architectural meter rule, and we measured everything. And we made a diagram of the house. And we decided that if we took all of these doors off, you see, which to just lift off their hinges, that we could make this whole area one huge auditorium. And that then it would be possible for the election of the Universal House of Justice to take place in the Master's and in the Guardian's house. The voting took place here in this building, and then the tellers were handed over the box with all the ballots of the delegates in it. And I remember Ernest Gregory was the head teller. And he said, we've counted the ballots, and the count is complete now. And do you want to hear the result? I said, no, astaghfirullah, don't you tell me the result. I don't want to hear the result. I want to hear the result when you read it out loud to the delegates in the convention. So then we went to the hall that we had rented on Mount Carmel. Yes, and we went there, and he told them that 9 of our supreme body, and oh, how excited we were of this election of the first House of Justice in the Baha'i world.
The waiting crowd of the Hands and delegates in the auditorium, as the members took their place on the platform. The joy of the delegates was indescribable as they all gathered at the mansion of Baji to pay homage at the shrine of Baha'u'llah. They also assembled at the entrance of the archives building for group photos.
I remember Mr. Banani's chuckle. He was so full of fun. He had such a lovely sense of humor. He was so warm. And so was Faizi. You remember, Baha'u'llah told his followers when they were in the prison of Akka, and he went in and told them, don't laugh so loud, they will think we are crazy. And these hands were so happy, the House of Justice was so happy, it was such a joyous occasion, you see. The election of the supreme body, that there was a great deal of joy on everybody's part. That's what I shall always associate with it.
The crowning event was the celebration of the Most Great Jubilee, the 100th anniversary of the declaration of Baha'u'llah in the Garden of Rizwan in Baghdad. This was to take place in London at the Royal Albert Hall, with the participation of over 6,000 Baha'is from every region of the world. It was here that the members of the First Universal House of Justice were introduced to a waiting Baha'i world. The crowning glory of the Guardian's 10-year World Spiritual Crusade was finally realized, and the hands of the cause of God were there to proudly witness the fruits of their beloveds and their own tireless endeavors. A tribute to the hands, paid by the House of Justice, was conveyed at the World Congress. The entire history of religion shows no comparable record of such self-discipline, such absolute loyalty, and such complete self-abnegation by the leaders of a religion finding themselves so suddenly deprived of their divinely inspired guide. The debt of gratitude which mankind, for generations, nay, ages to come, owes to this handful of grief-stricken, steadfast, heroic souls is beyond estimation. Immediately following the World Congress, the Universal House of Justice held its meetings here, and a historic decision taken was to have no officers. The Hands, who had similarly decided not to have permanent officers, devised at their last conclave a future 9-year plan to commence at Rizwan 1964 and end at Rizwan 1973. This projected 9-year plan was then submitted to the Universal House of Justice for its consideration.
Among the 3 major tasks of the 9-year plan adopted by the Universal House of Justice was the development of the institution of the Hands of the Cause of God, with a view to the extension of its functions into the future. Midway through the plan, the Universal House of Justice announced the establishment of 11 continental boards of councillors for protection and propagation of the faith.